Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good new topic. Let's do it. What's your can't eat at everybody's house horror story? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I told my dad my sandwich tasted like fly spray at my grandma's house. He didn't believe me. 2 days later, I catch my grandma spraying the benches clean with the $2 fly spray you find at the cheap store. Dad figured it was safe to make sandwiches straight on the countertop because they look clean. I dragged him over to see, and he apologized and took my sister and me for fish and chips for lunch. I visited a friend's house who was living with his mother. She asked if I wanted coffee, and I said I would. Upon getting to the bottom of the cup and taking the last few gulps, I found there was a used bandage stuck to the bottom. Never ate or drank there again. I was babysitting a kid in a pretty dirty house. I was told to wake him up, supervise bathing and changing clothes, and feed him. I was welcome to whatever was in the fridge. Okay. The house and his clothes were filthy. Then when I opened the cabinets, floods of roaches poured out. There were roaches in every opened box and container. I took him back to my house and returned him later that day. I hope the boy ended up in a better situation. I found out CPS got involved shortly after. My first boyfriend's parents invited me for Thanksgiving. I came over a few days before Christmas, and all the same dirty dishes from Thanksgiving were still in the kitchen. I passed on coming over for Christmas dinner. I went to a friend's house after school. He was going to teach a group of us to play D&D. We got there and his house was disgusting. I'm not the neatest person, but the carpet hadn't been vacuumed in forever. Clothes were all over the place and dirty dishes were stacked everywhere. I tried to be polite, even though the place reeked, but at some point he was like, "Who wants snacks?" He picked up a bowl that was crusted with stuff, splashed in some water, wiped it with a towel that clearly hadn't been washed that decade, and poured chips into it. Then he asked if we wanted to stay for dinner. We did not. My grandma made me a food phobic from a young age. Whether it was ramen with moths floating on top or chunky milk in my cereal, it just scarred me for life. Dinner at her house was always a fight. Not eating her food was not an option. I'm not sure why that was the hill she would always choose to die on, because she was an amazing grandma other than this. Expiration dates aren't a thing. If the cheese was moldy, you cut it off. I think living through the Great Depression and raising kids in poverty changed her mindset on food. I mean, obviously she's doing something right because she's 91. She must have been the immunity of a superhero. I used to help an old neighbor with a grocery shopping. I dropped the bags at her door and she'd give me a check for the amount of groceries. She'd give me homemade cookies once in a while, chocolate chips. I didn't ever eat them because one time I caught sight of her apartment. It was a large studio, a small kitchen, a TV, and a bed and a couch, and about 20 cans of cat food half eaten, 1 million flies, small maggots in different stages of growth, dishes with crusty food stuck to them, and a wall of empty beer cans. After I saw that and got a whiff of her apartment, I started helping her with taking garbage out and putting groceries away, cleaning out her fridge and making sure her cat was healthy. A couple months later, she got COVID, ended up at a rehab facility, and passed within 2 weeks. Some people need help and a little company. There was one time I was eating at my boyfriend's house at the time, and his grandmother was cooking food. She wasn't feeling well, and everyone offered to cook that night, but she insisted. Usually, when she's cooking, she doesn't like anyone in the kitchen. The thing is, the kitchen is the first thing you see when you walk into the apartment. So I came from the store to help pick up a few things for dinner. I walked in, saw her blowing her nose with her hand, and then used the same hand to massage seasoning into the chicken. She cooked the chicken in the rice. I didn't eat that day, and just said I ate before I came over. Some of his family members thought I was rude, but I didn't have the heart to tell them, since they also don't like me very much because I was shy. I graduated high school at 6'10", but weighing only 120 pounds. Well, that's not skinny, that's emaciated. The food prepared by my bio mom was so bad that it wasn't providing me with the nutrients or calories I needed to survive. I went off to college, where I had to cook for myself. I wasn't allowed to cook at home because my father insisted that cooking was woman's work. Not only did I discover that food didn't have to be burned to a crisp, flavorless, or boiled until everything was gray, I also discovered that food can be made to taste good, and using things like salt or pepper, spices, or various condiments can make it taste amazing. The freshman 15 likely saved my life. The thing is, I don't think that my mom was even aware that her food was that disgusting. Whenever we went out for dinner, which was more often than what my father wanted, but he was the one that insisted on going, she did nothing but complain about how the food was undercooked, practically raw or too spicy to eat. When she went to other people's houses, including her own extended family, she would criticize them for doing it wrong. When she watched them cook anything, she would often end up refusing to eat their food because she watched them ruin it when they cooked it. We never had guests over to eat her cooking, ever. A girl was interested in me at the time and had cats. I came to her house one day to pick her up for a date, and he had a large sack of rice open in her pantry with the pantry door open. One of the cats hopped out of the sack of rice, and she just casually laughed at it like, "Oh, they're always getting into things." They came over the following weekend, the same pack of rice that was in the pantry, and I could hear one of them tussling around in it again. We stopped dating sometimes after that, but anytime she offered to cook for me, I immediately pivoted to taking her out to eat instead. We have a 73-year-old coworker who's a legit hoarder. I'll get to the point without going too far down this rabbit hole. Years ago, we had a potluck for our crew. As lunch is coming up, we are all getting cleaned up and putting all the food out. I go to the bathroom to clean up, and I see Ron walk out of the stall as he's buttoning up his pants and walking right out. I go to our lunch area, and I see him in line, and the first thing he does is grab a handful of chips and put it on his plate. I grab that bag and hand it to him. I tell him, "These are yours now." Long story short, I tell my boss why I did it, and he agrees. After that, I never participated in potlucks on the same crew as Ron. I mean, so many of these are disgusting, and some are just mindlessness, and not washing your hands and then grabbing public food, ugh. But there's a lot of people out there, so just be mindful at your next potluck. Use tongs. I had to stay at a friend's cousin's house for a few days. I wasn't allowed to stay in my own home due to abuse allegations, and she was nice enough to take me in. The thing is, the house was higher level. I slept on the floor, which was covered in clothes and a 3-inch layer of cat hair. I hope it was cat hair. She fed me macaroni and cheese, but I distinctly remember there being green crusts on the noodles and the fork being dirty. Not wanting to be rude, I picked out what noodles I could and claimed I wasn't hungry since I had to leave my home. The milk she offered me the next day was cottage cheese, and I politely called another friend to ask if I could sleep on their couch because I was finding bugs on my body. Worked as a cleaning lady. There was one woman who had schizophrenia. She was kind, but damn, that house was the stuff you see on TV shows. They should send a team of professionals. She had a rat cage, and I've had pet rats myself, so I asked her about it. She said he had died. I took a closer look, and the water in the bottle had black spots all over it. The water had gone bad or something. I've never seen water go that bad in my entire life. The rat was gone, luckily, but the whole cage was still in there, like the rat had never left. Decided to do some dishes. They were piling up quite a bit, but she had no clean sponge or clean towels. She also didn't know where they were. There was a spot on the floor where 2 flies were feeding themselves. As I vacuumed, they flew away. She asked me if I'd like some coffee, and just automatically I said yes before I realized what I had done. Right before she handed it to me, she said, "I wonder when I last cleaned that thing. Must have been about 2 years ago." I said I forgot I had a cup of coffee at the previous house and shouldn't drink too much caffeine, and excused myself. I went with my then fiancé to visit some relatives of his. We arrived at their place to find they were serving up leftovers of the noodles dish, Panit, that had been their fare the night before. Now, if you know anything about the handling Pansit safely, you'd know that it goes rancid real quick in hot weather. I could smell that it had gone off, even from the doorway of the house. One of the older relatives knew this too, and bundled some of us to get McDonald's nearby. Those who insisted on eating the Pansit got a bit sick later that day. What a mess. My parents owned and rented a few mobile homes back when I was a kid. For many years, this older couple and their 2 boys lived in them. We would hang out after school. On the weekends, we were good buddies, but I could never have a sleepover at their house. For months, I begged, and eventually my parents said yes. That night, we made microwave pancakes. We went to their bedroom with our food, and eventually I sat my plate down to go to the bathroom. When I returned, my plate was covered in cockroaches. Apparently, they had lived in multiple of my parents' trailers, and they had to spray and fumigate every time they left. My dad said that I just couldn't get the message, and apparently had to learn the hard way. These people were very nice people, and my parents apparently helped them out whenever they could. Hence the infestations in multiple units. Still today, I think about how many roaches probably crawled all over me that night. Bonus story. My grandpa was lifelong friends with this guy, like we grew up in the slums together. He always told me horror stories and would never go to his house. Well, my grandma used to babysit for this couple, and one day she, for whatever reason, had to drop the baby off at my grandpa's friend's house so his wife could help her out. When she came to pick the baby up, she said they had a dog chained to a piano leg inside the house. It had run a circle in the carpet and damn near pulled my leg off. There were ketchup stains on the ceiling where someone had smacked the bottle and it shot ketchup out. Apparently, when she got out there, the lady couldn't find the baby, and it somehow gotten under a pile of clothes. I slept over at a friend's house when I was in middle school. It was really dirty and trashed, and also had this bizarre, powerful funk I couldn't identify. But I didn't think too much of it. At the time, I had a bad habit of getting up in the middle of the night for a midnight snack. So I went into the kitchen because they had left the leftovers from dinner out, and a kid doesn't know any better. I hit lights, and man, every plate, dish, item of silverware, etc. on the table was absolutely covered in cockroaches. They didn't even run when the lights came on because they knew they owned that house. I somehow managed to turn the light back off and retreat to the living room before emptying the contents of my stomach and curling up in a ball, imagining every stray itch or other sensation to be bugs crawling on me for the rest of the night. This is why I have a serious phobia of bugs. I had a small circle of coworkers that I was friends with, and we would occasionally hang out together outside of work. One of those coworkers was Lisa, a mid to late 40s woman who was single but had a couple of little yappy dogs and several cats. Lisa invited several of us over to play board games and said she would cook us dinner. We got there while she was still cooking and were standing around the kitchen talking to her while she finished up cooking. We all about shit our pants when she took the spoon out of the pot of spaghetti sauce she was cooking, tasted it, and then casually held it down for her 2 little yappy dogs to lick the spoon, and then stuck it right back in the pot of spaghetti and continued stirring like it was the most normal thing in the world. I'm not sure how the rest of them got out of eating it, but just before we were supposed to sit down and eat, I faked an emergency call from work and said I had to run to the office and deal with a problem and got the hell out of there. I was always busy every time she invited us over after that and never ate anything she brought to an office potluck. My own parents or sisters or any of my brother's houses, they're all the same dirty dishes in the sink with water back up that have dead flies in them, mold growing everywhere, fly poop and mouse poop on everything. The food they cook isn't fit for human consumption, nor would I let my dogs or hogs eat it. The parents and sisters took care of my grandparents for a while at my grandparents' house. That ended when I showed up unannounced and found mouse poop in all the cupboards, dirty dishes, and food spoilage in the fridge. I notified the right people and got the parents and biological sister ousted. They brought in a new woman to cook and clean. My daughters and I did a military-grade field day at the grandparents' house. We scrubbed human poop, baby, from the ceilings and walls, vacuumed and steamed floors, annihilated the kitchen and bathroom with chemical warfare levels of bleach, tossed out a bunch of old and spoiled food, and hand-washed every dish in the house. To this day, it is something I want to kick my dad and mother's asses over. They were incompetent caregivers. The grandparents loved the new girl and the cleanliness she brought with her. Grandmother was a neat freak and always kept a clean, lived-in house. Grandfather tried his best. My parents and siblings are slobs of their own making. Grandmother tried, and the cleanliness only stuck with me. All right, so maybe the U.S. Navy drove sanitation into my head as well. When I was a kid, my sister and I were great friends with the kid that lived next door. We mostly played outside and would spend time at whatever house we felt like at the time. I went to their house early on a Saturday once when they had just finished breakfast and were cleaning up. They were pouring the milk out of the glasses the family had been drinking out of right back into the milk jug. They had 6 kids, so I guess they had to be frugal. I never ate there, not with the thought of backwashing milk in my head. Ugh.